2 years ago tomorrow, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner declared in a now famous New York Times op-ed entitled, "Welcome to the Recovery," that because of actions taken by the Obama administration during its first year and a half, the U.S. economy was, as he put it, on the road to recovery. Well, I think it's pretty obvious that the Treasury Secretary jumped the gun on that one. Far from putting us on a path to recovery, it's now obvious that President Obama's policies have made a bad situation worse. Secretary Geithner was right to say that the president's policies were having an effect on the economy. He was clearly wrong to conclude that there were anything approaching a lasting positive effect on the economy. On the contrary, we can see that the policies of the president's first 2 years in office put us decidedly on the wrong path. 2 years after Secretary Geithner's op-ed, 23 million Americans are either unemployed, underemployed, or have given up looking for work altogether. Half of college graduates can't find a decent job, and with little or no income, many have decided to move back home with mom and dad. 2 years after Secretary Geithner all but declared victory, GDP growth is still at an anemic 1.5%. Foreclosures are still quite common. More Americans than ever are on food stamps. And 2 years after Secretary Geithner welcomed Americans to the recovery, more Americans are signing up for disability than finding jobs. More Americans are signing up for disability than are finding jobs. All of this after the president and a Democrat-led Congress passed his major policy initiatives. Now, in the face of all these things, you would think the administration would change course, go in a different direction. After all, if it claimed credit then for what it thought was a recovery, it would have to claim credit for what we actually see now. Not exactly, apparently. As it turns out, the administration is happy to claim credit when it thinks things are going well, but even happier to cast blame when it thinks things aren't going well. So 2 years after touting the impact the president's policies were having on our economy, the administration now acts as though they've been irrelevant. They act like an additional $5 trillion in debt isn't affecting people's anxiety about the nation's future. They act like a $1 trillion health care bill that hammers the private sector isn't affecting business activity. They act like the president's perpetual threats to raise taxes aren't impacting investment. They act like somehow the president's attack on free enterprise aren't putting a chill on risk-taking. They act like a barrage of new regulations isn't keeping businesses from hiring and expanding. It's Bush's fault. It's Bush's fault, they say. It's headwinds from Europe. It's the tsunami. It's the Republicans. Well, the president can't have it both ways. He can't be responsible for the economy when he thinks it's going well, then disavow responsibility when it clearly isn't. He's either responsible for it or he isn't. The Treasury Secretary had it right 2 years ago. The president's policies have had a big impact on the economy. What he got wrong was the fact that the impact was actually negative. If we were to ask ourselves whether Americans are better off now than they were 2 years ago, the answer would be obvious. The president's policies have clearly made it harder for Americans to find jobs and to keep those jobs. If the president wants to cast blame for the economic mess we're in, he should look no further than his own policies. And if he's more concerned about the future of the country than his own reelection, he'd work with us to go in a different direction. For 3.5 years, Republicans have stood ready to work with him on the kinds of policies that will empower the private sector to lift us out of this recovery once and for all. Comprehensive tax reform and all of the above energy policy, eliminating burdensome regulations. These are the kinds of things we could do together. We're ready whenever he is. And finally, Mr. President, on one other subject, I apologize to my friend, the Majority Leader, for delaying